Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Dynamics 365 Tech Talk. Today's topic is electronic invoicing in Saudi Arabia for Dynamics 365. My name is Brad, and I'll be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this session through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. This session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. When you join this event, your name, email address, and/or phone number may be viewable by other session participants in the attendee list. By joining, you're agreeing to this experience. The recording will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within the coming weeks. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions in the Q&A session near the end. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Gilberto Onodera. Gilberto, over to you.
Thank you, Brad. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining and be welcome. My name is Gilberto Onodera. I am Senior Program Manager at Microsoft. And in today's session, me and my colleague Marek will present to you the electronic invoicing service for Saudi Arabia. So here is our regular disclaimer slide. It's part of our routine of presentation, Microsoft disclaimer. And the agenda for today is going to be a quick introduction about the motivations and drivers for electronic invoicing. And I will go to present you a quick overview about electronic invoicing, and then I will put on the context of electronic invoicing for Saudi Arabia, and some closing notes at the end, and for last Q&A. I am planning to make 2 demonstrations along my presentation, and I am planning to spend approximately 45 minutes for this presentation, and then I will leave 15 minutes for question and answers. All right, a quick introduction about our motivations. The tax evasion is estimated globally around 30% of the collected taxes, which represents approximately 500 billions of euros. Thus, the prevention of tax evasion on trade operation is becoming the main engine for adoption of e-invoicing by the country's tax authorities, turning the electronic invoicing a global trend. Initially started as a requirement for business to government transactions, the adoption of e-invoicing is expanding to business and growing each time more. In 2019, approximately 65 billions of invoices were issued electronically, I mean paperless. And in 2022, the estimation is grows to 90 billions of invoices. And while in some countries, the invoicing is already consolidated as a regulatory requirement, and it has been run for years, like in Brazil, for example, others are just beginning this journey. So this is a common dilemma for the most of the global organizations with branches spread across different countries and regions when they have to comply with electronic invoices. From one side, they need to deal with requirements that lead to a variety of formats, architectures, technologies, and maturity levels to comply with local regulations. And the requirements are also mainly mandatory and exposes the organization to tax fines or other penalties in case they do not comply to them. And quite often they are enforced by date. Then it's necessary to have agility to respond to such demands. And in the opposite side, organizations have to deal with their own business demands, such as operate globally and scalable. Also, they want to optimize investments, meaning avoid reinventing the wheel or creating knowledge silos. And of course, they want to simplify the management and the system integrations. So electronic invoicing extends the electronic invoicing capabilities in Microsoft Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain Management. It was built over three main pillars: a simplified extensibility, a consistency across countries, and a richer functionality. The simplified extensibility means that the requirements for generation and receiving electronic invoices can be fulfilled through configuration rather than programming. With that, you have the flexibility to comply with electronic invoicing formats from different countries, simply doing file form configuration together, orchestration of actions flows to communicate with the tax authority simply by parameterizing predefined configurations. Especially if you have operations spread across different countries and regions, and you must comply with local invoicing regulations, electronic invoicing also gives you a consistent user experience across countries for setting up and monitoring the invoicing process, of course, without losing the perspective of a global and a common platform for invoicing solution. And for last, the richer functionality provides you support for a variety of countries, as stated in Microsoft documentation. And we keep growing the list, adding more countries. However, if your country or region is not listed there, you can create your own electronic invoicing configuration, extending one of existing configuration, or creating a completely new one for you. So electronic invoicing is already available for several countries, and now we are GAing, making general availability of the phase 2 for Saudi Arabia. Keep in mind that although the law enforced date for this second phase is January 2023, what I'm going to show you here and today is already available for you. And if you want, you can already start experimenting and validating the contents of the electronic invoicing for Saudi Arabia phase 2. So then, what the service does, right? First, it's a cloud service for issuing and receiving electronic invoices. Here, it's worth to mention that electronic invoicing is available only for cloud installation. It's not available for on-prem. For issuing, on the issuing side, it supports a variety of invoicing formats to comply with local regulations. It integrates with tax authorities' web services for granting electronic authorizations or approval. And for the receiving side, it supports also a variety of invoicing formats. And it also is natively integrated with Office 365 and SharePoint to automatically receive electronic invoices issued by the vendors when you are receiving. So this is how you can set up and start using electronic invoice. For who are posting orders in Microsoft 365 and issuing electronic invoice, we want to deliver a simple and transparent experience. Therefore, there are two distinct tracks to accomplish that. The track of administrator / experienced user and the track of the accounts receivable clerk, right? The role of the admin or / experienced user is to set up the environment, configure and deploy the configurations to the service using RCS. This can be achieved by three main goals, right? First, exploring the global repository and browsing the electronic invoicing configurations, here called electronic invoicing features that meet your requirements. Second, import the electronic invoicing features from the global repository into your regulatory configuration service, RCS. Here, RCS plays the role of your user interface, where you can perform the configuration of the features, right? You will also need to access your Azure subscription account to configure your storage account and upload your digital certificates into a Key Vault. So you will need to create secrets and certificates and then use them and use them in RCS. So for less, so this is the moment where you as experienced user, right, can make what we call a last mile configuration, such as entering for example, the URL of the web services of the tax authorities, right? Normally, we publish as some default information. You just need to go there and review and adjust if necessary. This is what we call last mile configuration. And third, you deploy the electronic invoicing features to the service itself, making them available for Microsoft 365 users to consume. And for the accounts receivable clerk, they keep doing their daily activities. Normally, the only thing that they need to know now, and I'm going to show you in my demonstration, there is a new page where they must use to send the invoices to the service. We call here the payload in order to generate the invoices, and the electronic invoices take the charge of formatting, communicating with the tax authority, and returning information and updating back F&O. Okay, so then let's start with our first demo. In this demo, I will show you the admin experience, right? Because this first part of the configuration, we call it is country agnostic. That means that in spite of the country where you are going to use, you have to do this because this is a common setup for every country. Okay, so the admin, the goal of the admin is to make the basic setups using RCS. Okay, so let me switch here to my environment. So here now I am in RCS here, right? If it is the very first time that you log into RCS, you won't see the style globalization feature. So the first thing that you have to do is to enable this tile here in feature management. You navigate across feature management and you select globalization. And you will find this feature that you should enable, right, in order to move on with electronic invoicing. When you enable this feature, then you will have access to this tile, which grants you access to the localization services. Here, there is the electronic invoicing service. So the first thing that you have to do is making some base configuration here on electronic reporting parameters. Essentially, what you have to tell to RCS is where to find the electronic invoicing service in the cloud. So you have to populate here the web server, the electronic invoicing endpoint URI. So a list of all URIs for electronic invoicing is available in Microsoft documentation. And here you also need to enter your LCS tenant, right? It's the place where you have installed your F&O, right? So once you have made this basic configuration, the second thing that you have to do as administrator is create the service environments, right? Service environments. What are service environments? Service environments are kind of a logical partition, right? Where you configure some basic elements, such as, for example, the key vault, which contains your storage account, and it contains your digital certificates and secrets, all right? So then, as administrator, your first action is to create this service environment, associate here the SaaS token for your key vault that you have configured on your Azure subscription account. Of course, you need to give access to the users that will have access to, will be granted permission to submit invoices and connect to this service. And once you have done that, you can validate, of course, and you publish this service environment to the service, right? So, and then as administrator, you have configured here RCS, you have configured your service environment. And as administrator, there is one last step that you have to accomplish on the FNO side, okay? So first, you need to enable the integration. Here I am on FNO, on Dynamics 365. You have to enable the integration of electronic invoicing of FNO with electronic invoicing. Here you have to navigate across feature management, and then you must search for electronic invoicing, and you will see some new features right here, electronic invoicing integration. Then you should enable that. Once you enable this integration in FNO, new forms will be available, right, for working with electronic invoicing. So, for example, if you go to Organization Administration, you'll see a new node here, Electronic Documents, and here in Setups, you'll see Electronic Document Parameters. Remember that I am wearing the hat of administrator, so then as administrator, I have to accomplish a last configuration step here in this tab, which is tell to FNO where is the service, the electronic invoicing, what is the address of the electronic invoicing service in the cloud. Notice this is the same address that you populate in RCS when you configure RCS. So this is how FNO will know how to find the electronic invoicing service in the cloud. And here you have to tell which service environment you want to connect, right? So once you do that, you are done as administrator, and your setup, your country agnostic setup was accomplished. Okay. So moving back to my presentation. Now, let's start diving in a little bit more details for electronic invoicing for Saudi Arabia. So, what is something about the scope for Saudi Arabia? We implemented the two models defined by the tax authority. The first one is the clearance mode. Here, the definition is they call tax e-invoice, right? The tax e-invoice is an invoice that requires communication when you are submitting. It requires communication with Zadka tax authority for approval. That means that you have to send to Zadka. Zadka will reply to you approving that invoice. And we have the reporting model and the reporting mode where we generate what they call a simplified invoice. In this case, the simplified invoice, as you might know, doesn't require approval. Is generated and sent to Zadka only for reporting purpose. So, giving a little bit more details about our scope of electronic invoice for in this phase 2. Here we have at the center, we have finance, the Dynamics 365 finance, right? So in the phase 1, we already accomplished the generation of QR code. And for phase 2, what was in the scope? For sales invoice, which means invoices generated from sales order, free tax invoices, or project invoices, and credit notes, and for debt notes, we enable the tax invoice features, right? So that means that you have the ability to send those invoices to electronic invoicing services. Electronic invoicing services will then generate the tax invoice, will communicate with Zadka web services, and will read the response, will collect the response from Zadka containing the QR code from Zadka, and will update this QR code back in FNO, right? And also, we enable this simplified invoice scenario, which is for the same sales tax invoice, credit notes, debt notes, the ability to generate using the electronic invoicing services, the simplified e-invoice, and send this simplified e-invoice to Zatka for reporting purpose. And for retail, we also enable Dynamics 365 Commerce POS to generate the simplified invoices during the retail transactions, and of course, printing the QR code in the receipts, right? But the communication of the simplified invoices is not done directly to Zatka, right? It must be done. Where is my laser point? It must be done. Oops. Hold on a second. Brett, are you there?
Hey, Gilberto. We just see a black screen right now. Do you need to reshare your content?
Hello? Hello?
Gilberto, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you okay.
I think I lost. Hold on a second. Let me share again my monitor.
Yeah, go ahead and stop sharing and resharing. We'll get back on track here. Oh, we can see the content now.
Yes, I got something strange here in my computer. Sorry for that. You see can you see now?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. Okay, so as I was telling, we enable the integration of the communication of sales invoice. I was talking about retail, sorry. So then for retail, when you generate the simplified invoice, so you have to send the simplified invoice files to Commerce headquarters, and that can be done using the regular jobs, right? Integration jobs. The simplified invoice file goes together inside the regular job. And then using the same process of submitting the retail, the payload, you send this the retail transaction and the simplified invoice file to the service, and then the service will take the charge to communicate, to review the simplified invoice, and then send back to to Zatka for reporting purpose. Okay. So let me see if I. So. And okay, sorry, I forgot. And for last, we also support the onboarding process. Okay, so what is the onboarding process in the context of Saudi Arabia? It's the process defined by the tax authority to become an electronic invoicing issuer, right? So they have some basic prerequisites. One of them is to have a VAT number and also to have access to ERAD portal, which is the portal from the tax authority. And the process has basically 4 steps, right? The first one is to request a one-time password in Zatka portal, in ERAD portal. And using this one-time password, you will then generate a CSSID, a compliance cryptographic stamp identifier. This is nothing less than a digital certificate that you generate, and you will use this digital certificate to perform your compliance checks, right? Compliance check is a routine of validations that you will perform here using Dynamics 365 and electronic invoicing, where you will issue sales invoice, credit notes, debt notes, and from the sales invoice, credit notes, and debt notes, we will generate both tax invoices and send to Zatka Web Services for approval, And we will also submit simplified invoices to electronic invoices to electronic invoicing, and electronic invoicing will send to Zadka for approval. If and once Zadka approves all those requests successfully, then you are allowed to request a PCSID, a production cryptographic stamp identifier, which is a new digital certificate that you get, and then this is a digital certificate using for production. So you then install this digital certificate, this new digital certificate in your key vault, and then you start using electronic invoicing. Then from using that, then you can start using electronic invoicing for issuing invoices, electronic invoices in production. Okay. So now let's move on to my second demo. In this second demo, I want to walk through two basic flows, right? The flow of configuration using from performed by the experienced user persona. So, and the flow of the persona, which typically the accounts receivable clerk, which is going to post, which will use electronic invoicing on their daily activities. Okay, let's switch here. This is my okay. So now I am back in RCS. Remember, now I am wearing the hat of the experienced user, right? The persona who is going to make the invoice configuration. And the first part is for this experienced user is to navigate across globalization features. Here, navigate across electronic invoicing. And it will land to this page, right? This page is the place where the experienced user, this persona, will perform all configuration, right? So we simplified with this page. We wanted to simplify the experience of making all the configuration, and everything that you need to do in terms of configuration, you can do here, right? So if this is going to be the first time, remember when I said that the first thing that you have to do is explore in the global repository the features that are available. Then, so you simply click here and navigate across the configuration provider Microsoft, and you will see all electronic invoicing features that were published by Microsoft. Okay. You will see that the three features that we have already available for Saudi Arabia, right? The regular one for submission, the one specific feature for compliance check, which makes part of the onboarding process, and one third feature for commerce, right? Remember, and I show you for submitting the invoice, the simplified invoice files that were generated in the POS, and now you use this. You will use this feature to communicate to Zadka. Okay. Let's pick up this one, the Saudi Arabia, which is the part of the feature which is regular for submission of sales invoice. In this case, when you find this, you simply hit import here, but I have already imported here. It's already available in my instance. So let's take a quick look on what are the elements of this feature. So here we have, here on this tab, you can control the life cycle. For example, when you have 3 states, draft mode, in draft, you can make addition, you can customize, you can do everything. And then you set to complete and you set to publish, okay? In configurations, you have access to configuration of the file formats, right? So for example, let's take a look on the invoicing process, sales invoice. So this is the format of the sales invoice. For example, if you want to view how the format looks like, you can click here in view and then disregard this message. Then you can see the structure of the file, right? So you can see that this is an XML file. and you can see how the file was constructed, right? If you want to customize this file, you can simply edit here, and you can add new nodes, you can add new fields, you can change, you can replace or adapt the mapping. So using this, you can fulfill your customization needs if you need, right? Remember that this is given by default, but if you want, you can customize this. If you are familiar with electronic reporting, we notice that we are using the same format designer tool that you normally use to configure a business document, right? So, and here also we have not only the file, you can configure the file format for the sales invoice, project invoices as well, but you can configure or adjust the intermediary files that are exchanged, that I use it to exchange with Zatka, okay? So here in setup, you can see what we call feature setups, and we have here 3 feature setups. Let's take a look on feature setup for sales invoice. Here in the feature setup is the place where you configure the action flow, right? Action flow is the place where you can orchestrate the sequence of actions to process this requirement, this electronic invoicing, from the moment, right, that the FNO sends the payload to electronic invoicing services until the end. So basically, each one of those actions are predefined actions that makes part of the electronic invoicing infrastructure. And the point here is just put those actions in a meaningful sequence to perform all the steps that are required to generate the file, apply signatures, communicate with web services, get a response, and especially in the context of Saudi Arabia, to acquire the QR code, right, containing the approval, and send this QR code back to FNO because that information must be stored in the invoice. Okay, so think that this as the way as to determine the behavior of my electronic invoicing feature. And here we have applicability rules. Applicability rules, they are important because they define the context for execution of this feature in the service, right? So this is how electronic invoicing knows, right, that this electronic invoicing feature must be run when a request is received from FNO, from Dynamics 365 Finance. Okay, and then once you have made your configuration, remember that for Saudi Arabia, everything comes as default. The only thing that you have to do is, as experienced user, is to import, and then you have to review this configuration, and if necessary, make some adjustments, such as reviewing the URL of the Zatka website. And if everything is okay, you simply deploy your feature